Imagine receiving what you think is a simple birthday gift, only to discover you have invited something ancient and malicious into your home through an object designed to look innocent and harmless. In 1970, a nursing student named Donna unwrapped a vintage Raggedy Ann doll from her mother and placed it on her bed in the Hartford apartment she shared with her roommate Angie, completely unaware that this seemingly innocent toy would become the center of one of the most terrifying and well-documented cases in paranormal history. Both women were practical and educated with no background or interest in anything supernatural, spending their days studying medicine and working night shifts at local hospitals, living ordinary lives filled with textbooks and clinical rotations. Nothing in their rational scientific training had prepared them for what began within days of bringing that doll through their front door. The apartment changed almost immediately in ways both women felt but could not initially articulate, as if the air itself had become heavier and the silence between sounds had grown thick with invisible watching presence. The strangeness started small enough that Donna and Angie convinced themselves they were imagining things or simply misremembering where they had placed the doll. They would leave it sitting with legs straight and return hours later to find the legs crossed. They would position the arms at the sides of the cloth body and come back to discover the hands folded as if in prayer or waiting. At first, they laughed it off as tricks of memory or perhaps one of them unconsciously moving it and forgetting, but the movements became impossible to rationalize away with logic or forgetfulness. The doll began appearing in entirely different locations from where it had been left. Donna would place it on her bed in the morning and return from her shift to find it sitting upright on the couch in the living room. Angie would leave it on a chair and discover it standing in a corner of the hallway, propped upright in a position that should have been physically impossible for a limp cloth doll with no internal structure or skeleton to support it. The women started testing their own sanity by carefully noting the exact position of the doll before leaving the apartment, even taking photographs on some occasions, only to return and find it had moved again. Then the notes started appearing, and whatever slim thread of rational explanation they had been clinging to completely snapped. Pieces of parchment paper began showing up around the apartment in places the women had just cleaned or walked past moments before. The notes were written in childlike handwriting with messages that seemed to plead for help. "Help us," read one note found on the kitchen counter. "Help Lou," read another discovered on the coffee table. The words were unsettling enough, but what made them truly inexplicable was that neither Donna nor Angie owned any parchment paper. They were nursing students living on tight budgets with notebooks and loose-leaf paper for their studies, but no decorative or antique writing materials anywhere in their possession. They searched the entire apartment, trying to find a logical source for the paper, and found nothing. Lou was a friend who visited the apartment regularly, and from the very first day he saw the doll, he told both women that something was profoundly wrong with it. He described feeling an instinctive revulsion when he looked at it, sensing something malevolent radiating from the button eyes and stitched smile. But Donna and Angie had dismissed his concerns as irrational superstition. Lou was proven horrifyingly right when the entity moved beyond manipulation and into direct physical attack. One night Lou fell asleep in the apartment and woke suddenly in the darkness with the overwhelming sensation that he was not alone in the room. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the Raggedy Ann doll at the foot of the bed, illuminated by streetlight coming through the window, and before he could move or cry out, he felt invisible hands close around his throat, choking him with impossible strength. He struggled against the attack, gasping for air, and then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure released, and he could breathe again. He turned on the light with shaking hands and lifted his shirt to discover 7 distinct claw marks across his chest, 3 vertical scratches on one side and 4 on the other, appearing before his eyes as if drawn by an unseen hand. The marks were not surface scratches, but deep welts that burned and bled. Terrified and finally convinced that something genuinely evil was happening, the women decided to seek help, but made the critical mistake of consulting a medium instead of someone trained in dealing with demonic forces. The medium came to the apartment and conducted a séance, eventually claiming to have made contact with the spirit inhabiting the doll. According to the medium, the entity identified itself as the ghost of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had died tragically on the property years before the apartment building was constructed. The spirit claimed through the medium that she was lonely and had attached herself to the doll because she felt safe with Donna and Angie and only wanted companionship and permission to stay with them. The story was heartbreaking and designed with precision to appeal to the compassionate nature of two women who had dedicated their lives to caring for others. Moved by what they believed was the plea of a dead child seeking comfort, Donna and Angie made a decision that would prove nearly catastrophic. They gave the spirit permission to remain in their home. The moment those words were spoken, the activity did not decrease as they had hoped, but instead escalated dramatically and became openly aggressive. A Catholic priest who heard about the case through local church networks recognized the signs of something far more dangerous than a ghost and immediately contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the Hartford apartment, and Lorraine felt the oppressive presence the instant she stepped through the door. She described it later as a weight pressing down on her chest and a cold intelligence watching from somewhere just beyond normal perception. Ed listened carefully as Donna and Angie recounted every detail of their experiences, taking notes and asking specific questions with the methodical approach of someone who had investigated hundreds of similar cases. When they finished their account, Ed delivered his assessment with absolute certainty. There was no 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins. There had never been a child. The entire story was a carefully constructed lie told by something that understood human psychology well enough to exploit it. Ed explained that demonic entities are patient and observant, studying their intended victims long enough to understand their personalities and weaknesses. This particular entity had watched Donna and Angie for weeks, learning that they were compassionate caregivers who would respond to the story of a suffering child. The tale of lonely little Annabelle was specifically designed to manipulate them into granting permission for the entity to remain, because permission is a form of spiritual consent that such beings require to establish a stronger foothold in the physical world. By agreeing to let the spirit stay, the women had unknowingly invited something demonic into their lives and given it power it would not have otherwise possessed. Ed was careful to explain that the entity did not actually possess the doll in the way people commonly understand possession. Instead, it used the doll as a conduit, a physical object that allowed it to manipulate the material world and create the illusion of a haunted toy. The attack on Lou was a demonstration of the entity's true nature and its ultimate intent. Left unchecked, it would have escalated from tormenting them to attempting possession of the people themselves. Ed Warren wrapped the Raggedy Ann doll carefully in brown paper, deliberately using a cloth barrier to avoid any direct skin contact with the object. During the drive back to their home in Monroe, Connecticut, the car stalled repeatedly on the highway despite having no mechanical problems. Traffic rushed past as Ed and Lorraine sat vulnerable on the shoulder until Ed sprinkled holy water over the bag containing the doll. From that moment, the car functioned perfectly for the remainder of the journey. Once safely back in Monroe, Ed constructed a specially designed glass case in the Warren Occult Museum and placed the doll inside with a hand-lettered warning sign reading, "Do not open." Catholic priests were regularly invited to bless both the museum and the case containing Annabelle. Ed insisted the doll should never be destroyed because doing so would only release the attached entity to find another object, another family, another door into the human world. The Annabelle doll remains locked in its glass case in the Warren Occult Museum decades later, still drawing thousands of visitors from around the world who come to see the famous object and feel the unsettling presence that even skeptics report sensing in the room. Over the years, those who chose to mock or disrespect the warnings have reportedly suffered serious consequences. The most documented incident involved a young man who slapped the glass case while taunting the doll and laughing at the idea that it could be dangerous. He left the museum on his motorcycle and was killed in a crash less than 2 hours later. The case became one of the most famous paranormal investigations of the 20th century, establishing the Warren reputation and eventually inspiring the Annabelle film series within the Conjuring universe. Ed Warren spent the rest of his life emphasizing that people consistently misunderstood the fundamental lesson of the case. The danger was never really about the doll itself, which was just cloth and thread and button eyes. The true danger was in the human willingness to believe a comforting lie when the truth is too frightening to accept, and in our tendency to invite darkness into our lives by mistaking manipulation for innocence. Hashtags: Paranormal Documentary, Haunted Doll, Annabelle the Doll, Ed and Lorraine Warren, Warren Occult Museum, True Horror, Paranormal Investigation, Demonic Possession, Haunted Artifacts, Supernatural Creepystories, Horror Documentary, Ghost Stories, Paranormal Activity, Vanishing Roads. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented paranormal case files. All events reference real investigations by Ed and Lorraine Warren.